So first thing I wanted to do is kind of give you a sense of what the day will look like. And this is kind of what the Saturday, all of the business of the convention will happen on Friday. And on Friday evening, there will be a special concert that evening. So Saturday, there will breakfast will be available, and then we will go into the liturgy of the word, or the first half of the Eucharist service. Um, when that is completed, we have each of the candidates is sending us a 4 to 5 minute video just to remind us who they are, to maybe make their last plea for how awesome they are, and we'll listen to that. So from about 10 to 10:20, or earlier if the service is completed by then. Then we will go through a process of explaining the voting process yet again. And the most important thing we have to do, which is certify the election. And so there is a specific number of two-thirds of all the congregations need to, delegates need to be present for us to have an election. So it's vitally important that everyone is there on time, is ready to be a part of that. Now, there you may have non-voting folks there during the worship service at 9 o'clock, but we will have a roped off area, and anyone who is not a voting delegate will have to move over to that area, which is going to be more or less where we'll have the concert, or where we'll have the worship service. So after the worship service time, we'll actually move to tables, and those who are not voting will just can either stay there or they can leave the room. Once we have folks seated at different tables, and you can sit in any way you'd like, though I think some congregations are talking about sitting together, but that's not necessarily a requirement. And we will then go into the election process. So everyone, there will be ballots that will have the candidates who are up for that current ballot. And as we go through this, that could change depending on if a candidate decides to withdraw after they see the results of a certain ballot. But just for this example, at 10:30 a.m., then we would kind of be starting the first ballots process. We would start with a song. We would then go into a prayer. And then we're going to ask folks to take some time for silent reflection. During that silent reflection time, the ballots will be handed out. And then folks will be asked to vote. There will be 3 or so people roving around who will have handed out the ballots, and then they will collect those ballots from you. There will be a different color if you're clergy or if you're laity. And in fact, they will be a different color, from my understanding, for every ballot. If we do a second, third, fourth ballot, each time it'll be a different color than they had been before. In the time of silence, and as you prepare to vote, our whole goal here is that we are taking the time to reflect, listen to the Word of God, the call of God on our heart, reflect on the things we know about the different candidates, and then voting on our own personal conscience and heart. The goal here is not that a congregation would all vote together, or we would have big conversations about who I'm going to vote for. Really, this comes down to you making a personal choice. You vote, those votes are collected, and once the votes are collected from everybody, then we will allow people to take a break. There'll be some videos being shown. There'll be opportunity for you to leave that area if you want and maybe get a snack, or head over to the area where we had the worship service and go sit down and just be in prayer. But it may we're planning on that it takes close to a half an hour for us to tally the votes and then do all the other actions that are required. And those other actions are uh, making sure that we have recounted the votes, make sure that we feel very confident in what those are, understand who the clergy voted for, understand who the laity voted for. Once we have that information, then the shepherds, these are volunteers who have connected themselves to a candidate, will call their candidate on the phone and let them know what the results of the ballot were. And no candidate, because of our canons, no candidate is required to uh, drop out because of a certain lack of number of voting. And so that's completely up to the candidate. But when the shepherd has the conversation with the candidate may say to us, "Well, I think maybe I should uh, withdraw from further ballots." And then the shepherd would share that with me as the kind of overseer of this election process. And then I would be in contact with that person because they have to give it to us in writing via an email that they are withdrawing from the election before we can move forward. Once all that is done, once we've gone through that whole process, then we will announce the results of the ballot. We will display those results on the screen, and it'll be broken down into clergy votes and to laity votes. At any time, if one of those laity or clergy end up voting for a majority, votes for one candidate, um, that's fabulous. But it is not an election until both laity and clergy vote at 50% plus one for the same candidate. So, and that doesn't mean that that might not happen, that the clergy votes for 50% plus one for one candidate and the laity votes for another. I was recently told that in Albany, their election process, I think it went through 3 to 4 ballots. And I may have been the first ballot, the laity chose a person by voting that was 50 plus one, and the clergy did not vote for that person. In fact, had voted a mixed break. They went through 4 more ballots, and the laity never didn't change. And finally, the clergy ended up uh, voting and ended up voting for the same thing the laity had. So it's not that if we see the clergy had voted for one candidate, we should all change our mind and go over to that. And if we see the laity voted for one candidate, it doesn't mean we all need to suddenly change our votes to that. It's that we're taking the time to pray through it, to reflect on who the candidates are, what we think is best for our entire diocese. And if a candidate ends up dropping out, then we are down to 3 choices or maybe down to 2 choices. So that's why it shows that it would take about an hour for a ballot. And we're going to be deliberately slow. If we get good at it, and the people doing the counting and all of us, get into the habit of doing this, maybe a ballot might take 50 minutes, but we're not going to be pushing it to get it done in 10 minutes or something like that. Um, if there's no election after the first ballot, we go to a second. If there's no election after the second, we go to a third. If there's no election after the third, we go to a fourth. I stopped there on my list with hope in my heart that we don't go to a fifth, sixth, or seventh ballot, but if we need it, we will. You'll notice that during the third ballot, during probably after the voting has been taken, you'll have the option of being able to pick up a little lunch and bring it back to your table or something like that. One of the things that we just have to make sure we share as the transition committee, we voted unanimously for this, is the idea that we don't want to be campaigning for any particular candidate. So once the voting happens, I'd encourage you to find something else to talk about. Don't try to talk about why you voted for this person or why you voted for that person necessarily in that break while things are being counted. It's an opportunity for you to be in prayer or just take a little break from that experience. And then when we come back and we find out who made it, or who uh, maybe who will be on the ballot for the second ballot or third, then you have the time to kind of again reflect and think about who these candidates are. But we would just strongly encourage you not to try to get someone to say, "Oh, you should be voting for this person or that person because I think they're better." Right? We're just trying to avoid that. I've kind of mentioned most everything that I just wrote here. Each ballot of the election, it will have a newly created ballot in a different color. In order to have us have an election, we must have a majority of voting delegates from each, the clergy and the laity, vote for the same candidate. And once the votes are tallied after each ballot, the shepherds will call the candidates with the results. When we get to the point where we have an election and uh, uh, a candidate has been elected by all the delegates or a majority of the delegates, it doesn't mean we just immediately jump up and down and shout. We have to contact that delegate or that candidate and make sure that they're willing to accept the position, which they sure as heck better be. But then they have to give us an email in writing to that effect before we can make that announcement. So again, we have to just make sure that we're really being cautious and going through this process diligently. Once we have an election, once the Bishop Thom would announce who that we have an election and who that would be, then we will celebrate by having Eucharist together, and which I think is a great way to end. And if it's possible, at the end of the Eucharist, if it's possible for us to be able to get the candidate who was elected bishop onto a or onto a Zoom call or something like that, we will do that at the end of that service for them to greet us. Um, I'm just we're always cautious about technology, and so if need be, they may just end up calling in on a phone. But our goal would be to try to get that person there. But wouldn't happen immediately after the election, just for the fact that we want to make sure it happens again well and that everyone is in a space where they can make that Zoom call. All right. I think that is it for the moment. And so I am happy to uh, open the floor to some questions. I'm not the only person in this room that knows answers. Uh, and so I let's see here. Someone just sent a question in the chat. Let me see if I can find that. All right, hold on. Got it. Can you speak to the signing of the certificate of election? Nope, I can't. Uh, Bishop Brian, can you do that for us?
I can do that. There'll be a form we will make in advance where we probably just fill in the name of the bishop-elect. And then really everybody does have to queue up and sign a form that has all these blanks on it, both from the lay side. It'll probably be separate. I think it will be separate, lay and then clergy, so that they have a record that there's a sufficient number, or that it matches, hopefully matches the list we give them about who all the delegates are. So we'll be, excuse me, part of the instructions, Mr. President, will be that no one leaves. No one leaves until they've signed the document. And it'll be a rather joyous moment.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, once the election is announced, that will happen before we go into the Eucharist. I mean, that's part of all the process we have to follow. Besides having Bishop Thom there, we also will have Canon Brian Nordwick, who's our consultant there, and his job is to dot the I's and cross the T's in this whole process, and to help us make sure we're doing that. So, between Bishop Thom and Canon Brian Nordwick, I believe us that we will follow everything to the letter of the law.
Yeah. It's really helpful to have the consultant there, because he'll have his checklist and
Yeah.
be all right.
Any other questions?
I just have a question. Actually, if no one has any technical questions, um, I'm just curious how many people on these screens have participated in an Episcopal election before? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Okay, just seven of these folks. Because
Can you re-ask that question, Bishop? I'm sorry, can you re-ask that question?
Oh, thank you, John. How many people have participated in a bishop's election before?
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. So I'm actually probably going to ask that question during my opening remarks, because it's been some time. I didn't go look up exactly when Bishop Michael was elected, but was in the aughts.
2004, I believe.
Thank you. So 21 years. I'm sure there's going to be a couple clergy who can claim that. But so it's for most folks, it's a once in a lifetime experience.
And
So enjoy it.
hopefully for all of us who've never voted in a bishop election, it will be a once in a lifetime experience.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions? Thoughts? All right. So what I want to make sure happens is, if you have not already, make sure you go to the diocese website, ndepiscopal.org, and there is a page there. You can click on Bishop Search, and you'll find some information about the different candidates. If you don't know who they all are, make sure you do. We have 4 amazing candidates that the nominating committee spent the time to vet and to discern with, to get to the point where we have 4 excellent candidates. And so that work needs to be honored by us also doing our job. If we're also going to put maybe another, I believe it was St. Stephen's. They put together kind of a bigger document. I don't know if it's just the stuff right off the website or not, but we'll try to share that too, if possible, or have that available at the tables, which just says who the candidates are. And it's really important to have gone back and listened to all their questions and answers. I think we had a total of 18 questions and answers that happened between the Fargo, Spirit Lake, and Bismarck meet and greets, and all of those are available on that website, on the ndepiscopal.org. So go back and listen. Each night was a totally different set of questions. So I would suggest that the Fargo one was kind of setting up some questions more about who they are. Maybe there was a lot of kind of like more almost like academic type of questions, almost in some ways. The questions in Spirit Lake tended to talk more about small churches and the churches that are small congregations that don't have full-time clergy, and so there was a lot of conversation about that. And in Bismarck, a lot of the conversation we talked about youth and some Native American things in that. And so each night had a different set of questions. So just make sure you've spent time with that and you know who each of these candidates are. And I would be happy to talk with anybody about the candidates. I'm not going to give anybody a preference. I'd just be happy to share what I know from my experience of meeting them. And there's other folks I think in your congregations, or other folks you may know from the nominating committee or things like that, who could at least just share from their personal experience who they are. And I think it'll be exciting, whatever happens. All right. Well, get yourself registered for the convention. Yeah. You know, the worst possible thing that could ever happen is we get to Saturday morning and we say, oh, we don't have enough people. We can't have an election. We'll do this again some other day. That's not anything that we're interested in. So I'm pretty much kind of almost feeling like I might be done with this election process. So 2 more weeks, but maybe let's do it after the election's done. that we were kind of like, okay, I'm done with this. Bishop Brian.
And not only that, but just to remind these parish leaders that we don't want to have our registration people turn someone away that we are not expecting. So if you have your delegates and you've assigned them and you've told Jessica Gravina at our office who's coming, and then sometimes if something happens and I'll send the spouse or I'll send the daughter or something like that. You got to be very intentional about communicating that to us before we get to Saturday, before we get to Friday, because we don't want to have an embarrassing moment at the registration table and have somebody frustrated coming all that way, etc. So,
Yeah,
a normal convention we can do things, but this time, with the whole with the whole church and our consultant watching, we're going to want to dot our I's and cross our T's.
and is the expectation is that this, especially the election process, will all be live streamed because the national office wants to watch the election along with us. So, um, everything we do will be seen across the entire earth. So we're gonna try to do it right. My wife would the first time I ever held her hand, she says, "If we're gonna do this, let's do it right." So I think that's the answer here today. If we're gonna do it, let's make sure we've done it properly. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I am excited. I look forward to seeing you at Prairie Knights Casino in a couple weeks. And I'm excited to celebrate the election of a new bishop on whenever ballot that happens, even if it happens at midnight. So thanks very much.